Howdy, Full Metal Cowboy straight shooting a review of The Secret of NIMH. This film was released in 1982 and is the directorial debut of animation legend Don Bluth. What more needs to be said about Don Bluth? He started out on top, and not only is The Secret of NIMH one of his greatest achievements, he also made other animated classics such as An American Tail and The Land Before Time. And there's also that video game, Dragon's Lair, which has great animation in it too. And the 90s have not been kind to Don Bluth. I guess I could talk about one particular film that Don Bluth made in the 90s, but more on that later. The Secret of NIMH is an adaptation of the 1971 children's book Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH. And there is one major significant change that was made for the film adaptation, and that was changing the protagonist's name. Mrs. Frisby's name was changed to Mrs. Brisby because while the film was in production, they asked the company if they could use the name Mrs. Frisby, and, well, there's a clear reason why the name was changed to Mrs. Brisby. There are two things I think are worth noting in regards to the history of the production of The Secret of NIMH. Don Bluth used to work for the Walt Disney Animation Studio, but he and some other crewmen left the studio and decided to have their own studio, which was, of course, Don Bluth's own animation studio. And did you know the film rights to the book was offered to Walt Disney Animation Studios? Yeah, as time would tell, they turned it down. Well, that sure bit them in the tail. When Don Bluth was making his animation studio with fellow crewmen, someone in that crew actually got Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH and later gave it to Don Bluth to read. And then they made a feature film based on it. And after having seen The Secret of NIMH for the very first time... What? What the I can explain. I did not own the film on VHS growing up, and there wasn't enough word of mouth that I would be interested in it. There's my reasoning. But regardless of the film's age and how long it took me to watch this, I can say this. The animation in The Secret of NIMH is a sight to behold. It looks amazing for 1982, and this was at a time where Disney was not doing so well with their animated films in the 80s. And the little nuances that they threw in The Secret of NIMH is incredible to look at. There are techniques such as rotoscoping and backlighting that were extensively put into the animation, and it still looks good today. When The Secret of NIMH was in production, MGM did little to promote the film. So Aurora, a production company, had to pay a large sum of money to get its advertising fees out there. So if it wasn't for that decision, The Secret of NIMH would have bombed. And as it was released in theaters, it ended up running moderately well, but it gained a larger following with home video releases. The score was composed by the late, great Jerry Goldsmith. Need I say more? Well, I wouldn't call The Secret of NIMH one of my favorite scores by Jerry Goldsmith, but it's still great. The Secret of NIMH features a voice cast of well-known cast members at the time, such as Elizabeth Hartman, John Carradine, and Dom DeLuise. The one thing that may vary with other viewers is the pacing of The Secret of NIMH. There are times where the film is deliberately slow. I don't see this as an issue, but I can see some people getting a little bored at times. But to its credit, there is a lot of payoff in The Secret of NIMH. While Disney animated films can be dark at times, it doesn't go to the extent of The Secret of NIMH, and that's something that I'm glad Don Bluth was able to have his own animation studio for. He can present his films the way he wants to without having to have a certain standard that the Walt Disney Animation Studios would likely have, because I think that would limit some of the creative intent for Don Bluth regarding The Secret of NIMH. But the one thing that sure made The Secret of NIMH one of the finest animated films ever made is Mrs. Brisby herself. Mrs. Brisby, in my opinion, is also one of the best mothers I have seen in an animated film. What she goes through throughout this entire film is awe-inspiring. I can't say I relate to her, but just the amount of things she goes through is just enough to really get me invested with her character. And the more I go into this film, the less value it has on one's experience. Because the reason I'm being extremely vague with this one is because I'd rather let you discover this film for yourself if you have not seen it yet. So please do see The Secret of NIMH if you want to see great animated films, because this really is one of the best animated films I've ever seen. And I'm going to be shooting a 10 out of 10 for The Secret of NIMH. This is not going to be the only Don Bluth film I am talking about today. There are a few more coming. So until then, at ease.